Hello everyone and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. I want to share with you the books and series in the fantasy genre that I am most excited about to start reading. This video will not be about my reading plans for next year, although that will inevitably be mentioned once or twice. For now, I want to highlight the books and series that are highest on my TBR, even though I may not get around to reading them anytime soon for several reasons. In spite of me not buying books for a while, my TBR keeps on growing. The many great recommendations by fellow booktubers keep on adding books to my Amazon wishlist. I have been doing a count of all the fantasy books that I really want to read at this point, regardless of me having a physical copy of them or not. In total, I counted somewhere around 370 books, divided into standalones and several series sizes that looks something like this. As I'm nearing my second anniversary as a reader of fantasy, sci-fi, I believe I now have a better understanding of the kind of books I will like and which are perhaps less suitable for me. For instance, I'm not a huge fan of too much violence, extensive war battles, or characters plotting intrigues to gain power. While a good coming-of-age story, an apprentice being tutored by his or her master, a solid philosophy inside the world, and prose that rises above the functional storytelling are right up my alley. Still, some of the series that are said to have my lesser appreciated elements remain high on my TBR. I don't want to exclude myself entirely from certain tropes or storylines. After all, I haven't read very much yet and really want to learn more about my pros and cons in this genre. Perhaps there's a book or series that can totally win me over regarding battle scenes or politics. So, let's dig into this huge pile of almost 400 books and pick the standalones and series that are ranked the highest on my TBR. I will mention the books and series in random order, so this is no ranking video. Let's begin with the standalones. I will limit myself to just 4 standalones. First off, Guy Gavriel Kay. Since reading Tagana at the end of 2023, I am in love with this writer's work. I've committed myself to reading his entire oeuvre and have recently read his first trilogy, the Fionavar Tapestry. Next up is going to be A Song for Arbonne, a novel that has received much praise on Booktube. Not that I need to be persuaded anymore, but in particular Josh from Red Fury Books is a true advocate for GGK's work. Other than the expectation that this is going to be a memorable read, I hardly know anything about the book. And I like to keep it that way. I prefer going into a book as blind as possible. Another standalone high up on my TBR is The Dreaming Tree by C.J. Cherryh. This is a binding of a duology with a new ending, and that's all I know about this book or its author. It's the title and the wonderful Michael Whelan cover that makes me want to start this book today, if I had the time. I've picked it up several times when trying to decide on a new read, but each time I shoved it back to its slumber upon my bookshelves. Next year this book will most certainly be read, although I believe I also said that a year ago. Another standalone that I cannot wait to get to is To Ride Hell's Chasm by Janny Wurts. She's one of my most anticipated authors, mainly because of the many videos from A Critical Dragon, where he analyzes Janny Wurts' prose. And I'm quite confident that her writing is exactly for me. When an author is this prominently on my radar, I'm interested in reading her or his works in their publication order. That is the best way for me to get an idea about their development as a writer. I've started reading Janny Wurts already with her debut novel Sorcerer's Legacy. I did not expect this book to be a full-blown exposé of her as a mature writer, and it wasn't. All the more reason to dig further into her works. But before I get to this much praised standalone by her, I will read her first trilogy, The Cycle of Fire, the Empire trilogy, which she co-wrote with Raymond Feist, and her novel, The Master of the White Storm. Then, and only then, will I pick up To Ride Hell's Chasm. But to be honest, apart from her magnum opus series, Wars of Light and Shadow, this standalone is my most anticipated book of Janny Wurts. Patience. Patience. The final standalone I would like to highlight is Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. I don't own a copy of this book yet, but as soon as I've finished my Read What You Own challenge, I will buy it. On Booktube I've seen nothing but raving recommendations for this book, and I want to find out for myself how good it actually is. There are only 6 duologies on my list, at least what are series of 2 books at this point. I want to mention 2 that I cannot wait to start reading. One is The Darkwater Legacy by Chris Wooding with The Amber Blade and The Shadow Casket. I don't know if this series is completed, but these are big books, so 2 of them is enough for now, I guess. I have had these on my reading plans for 2024 and, like many others, have not gotten around to them. But with a clean slate of 2025 ahead, I have good hopes of picking up this series. It was Andrew Watson, by the way, who sold me on these books. A real Tolkien-esque fantasy is always reading time well spent. The second duology is The Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. Of course, this was intended to be a trilogy, but nobody seems to believe that the third book, The Doors of Stone, will ever see the light of day. So I'll just put it in this category. I have very, very high hopes that The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear are exactly my kind of fantasy books. Rothfuss is praised as a writer of the most beautiful prose, something I am usually highly appreciative of. I am expecting nothing less than a lifetime experience of these books. I have no idea when I will get around to them, but it has to happen somewhere in this coming year for sure. I've taken these books out of their slumber on my shelves many times already, leafing through them and being thrilled about this future read. It is obvious that 3 books is the most preferred series size by authors and readers. There are more than 40 trilogies on my list, so I'll do my best to go through my most anticipated ones as quickly as I possibly can. The first one that I already mentioned is the Empire series by Raymond Feist and Janny Wurts. Not only does this series wallow in praise on Booktube, but I've also read the Riftwar Saga by Feist, which I absolutely loved. So, a good series which has received nothing but praise, and is set in a world I'm already familiar with, and is written by 2 very accomplished writers. What more could I possibly want? Next up is the Life Ship Trader trilogy by Robin Hobb. So far I was only able to read the first of the Realm of the Elderlings series, the Farseer trilogy by this author. I really wanted to read the next 2 trilogies in this 16 books monster series, but, well, things go as they go. The second trilogy, in the Realm of the Elderlings, is one of the most praised, and I'm very fond of nautical stories. I loved the nautical bits in the Wheel of Time. I sure hope that it won't be too long anymore before I can take Ship of Magic, The Mad Ship, and Ship of Destiny off of my TBR. Next is the first trilogy in the huge Drizzt series by R.A. Salvatore. I don't know how many books there are in this series, but I have narrowed it down for myself to this first trilogy. Based on what I've heard about these books, I'm expecting a rather easy read with lots of adventure and action. Well written, but not exactly highly demanding prose. Even though I am a huge lover of intricate prose, an easy read on that front is welcome at times. They're not very big books, which is also welcome. Somewhere in the top regions of my TBR is Memory, Sorrow and Thorn. the trilogy by Tad Williams that seems to have received a renaissance in attention on Booktube. I cannot wait to get to the Dragonbone Chair, Stone of Farewell and the huge To Green Angel Tower. These are chunky books, which I don't mind at all. I am expecting a strong Tolkien-like book, but with a definite own Williams vibe to it. Not that I know what that vibe feels like, but it's definitely not a Lord of the Rings clone. At least that's what I've understood from Booktubers who have reviewed this series. I'm extremely curious about the Lycanus trilogy by James Islington, and of course about the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. The Lycanus trilogy has received much praise, but also some mixed feelings among Booktubers. I believe First Law intrigues me even more at this point. The closest thing to real grimdark I've read so far was The Lies of Locke Lamora, and for many this is not true grimdark, whatever that may be. First Law definitely qualifies, and I cannot wait to get my first taste of this popular subgenre. It depends on my experience of this first trilogy if I will continue with Abercrombie. But if his character work is as good as everybody claims, I'm afraid I have another complete oeuvre to buy. Moving on to the trilogies that I do not yet own. Absolutely on top here is The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill. I know that this series is going to be larger than the 3 main titles that have been published so far, but for now I'll just rank it among the trilogies. Especially Mike from Mike's Book Reviews has convinced me of the outstanding quality of these books. And finally, I will mention the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee in this category. Highly praised all over the place, and I believe these books are not too huge. To make things a bit easier, I'll combine the next 3 categories into one. In this category of series with 4, 5 or 6 books, I have 24 on my TBR. One of the first I want to mention is that I want to continue with The Gentleman Bastards by Scott Lynch. I should rank this among the trilogies, I know, but these categories are arbitrary anyway. I believe that number 4 of this series, The Thorn of Emberlane, has been announced, but there is not yet an actual publication date because the author's perfectionism is getting in the way. Interesting, by the way, to see how success freezes up one author and boosts the other. The psyche of fantasy authors. Nice topic for a video. Anyway, I loved The Lies of Locke Lamora and look forward very much to continue with the series, even though I hear mixed opinions about the sequels. Very high on my list is the Greatcoats series by Sébastien de Castell. I somehow anticipate some sort of blend between the Rhaeria Revelations and the Three Musketeers. A nice flowing story with lots of banter and adventure. These are not big books, so I expect an easy read, which I always look forward to. I strongly believe that this series may even be read this year. But I tend to lose sight of reality, meaning my slow pace of reading, when I'm enthusiastic about books. I honestly don't know how many books actually fit into David Gemmell's Draenei series, but I definitely want to start with Legend, the first one in the series, ASAP. I own the first 6 in the series, and I honestly have no idea how I will like the follow-ups, but Legend has gotten nothing but praise. So, being sensitive to that, it's high on my TBR. As with most of the books I mention in this video, I hardly know anything about this one, and yet I cannot wait to get to it. That also goes for The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. Even though I am expecting a lot of battle and war, I'm still very eager to read this series. Gwynne will be a new author for me, as so many on this list will be. The fact that so many different kind of booktubers speak highly of these books absolutely helps me to have high expectations for this 4-book series. Gwynne is said to write the best battle scenes in fantasy, so if he cannot convince me, no one can. One series that I cannot not mention on this list is, of course, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. Martin, if alone for the beautiful title of this series. The overall love, especially for the first 3 books in this series, all over BookTube, had me hooked from day one on my journey into fantasy. I bought the available 5 books right away at the start of this journey. It's just because of its chunkiness and it being unfinished that I haven't made any haste to start reading it. And also, I want to be involved in only one really big series at the time. This year I finished reading The Wheel of Time, and right now I'm discovering the beauty and magic of the Stormlight Archive. Which huge series I will embark upon next is a mystery at this point, even to myself. Another highly anticipated multi-book series is the Rhaeria Chronicles by Michael J. Sullivan. His Rhaeria Revelations were literally that to me, a revelation. Such a skilled writer and storyteller. The banter between Royce and Hadrian is and will probably remain my benchmark for excellent banter within fantasy. I cannot imagine anything topping this near-to-perfect wordplay between lovable characters. Just before I forbade myself to buy any new books, I purchased the first 4 in this series, and I believe there are more to come. Great! The final series in this category I want to mention is The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. I have heard nothing but good things about these 4 books, and I've always enjoyed Asian-inspired stories. The Kung Fu, Tai Chi, I Ching, and Tao culture has always intrigued me, even though I know very little about it. It breathes wisdom and serenity. I don't know if that can also be said for this series, but somehow this is what I am expecting. As soon as my own ban on buying books has been lifted, I will purchase this series. The final category is the really humongous great series, like The Wheel of Time. I identified 9 of those on my TBR, but there are more, of course. 2 of these huge series I am most highly anticipating are, of course, the Malazan Book of the Fallen, the huge 10-book series by Stephen Erickson, and the already mentioned Wars of Light and Shadow by Janny Wurts. This series has recently been finished with the publication of the 11th and final installment, Song of the Mysteries. Both series I dread a little. First of all, because of their scope. But hey, I managed to read the entire Wheel of Time, so I have faith in that department. Malazan I dread because of its grimdark character and because the first books are said to be very confusing. My track record for reading books that give me no solid ground regarding the world or the story is not very promising in that respect. But the fact that the final book, The Crippled God, has been laureled in such convincing fashion by so many booktubers has to make it all worthwhile. In that respect, I have to mention Matt of Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews. His love for The Crippled God is very contagious. And as for the huge Janny Wurts series, I dread her condensed prose a little bit. Even though I'm a huge fan of condensed and poetic prose, to have to go through that for 11 chunkers is quite another thing. I also occasionally appreciate to sit back and relax a little bit. But this is what I anticipate regarding The Curse of the Mist Wraith and so forth. I have already started reading the Discworld series, and even though it has been hit and miss for me so far, I did buy the entire series already. So now I simply will have to go on, which I gladly will. Even though my last experience with Equal Rights was not very successful, I'm eager to continue. Terry Pratchett is one of those authors who intrigue me enough to want to read his work in publication order. I started, upon recommendation of many booktubers, with Guards Guards, which turned out to be not the perfect starting point for me. I then began with the Tiffany Aching sequence with The We Free Men, which was much better. Now I systematically plough my way through them all, with number 4, Mort, as my next. The early books are reasonably short, so they are perfect palate cleansers for me in between all the big books I'm reading. Another huge series very high up on my TBR is Redwall by Brian Jake. I've started the first book this year but put it down again for some reason. I own the first 6 books in this series of 22 volumes, so I can give it another try at any moment, which I most certainly will. There are, of course, much more books that I could have mentioned, like The Magician's Trilogy by Lev Grossman, the Threadlight Trilogy by Zach Argyle, the Fablehaven series by Brendan Moll, or the Pandemonium Rising Trilogy by Michael Sliter or Slitter. How about the 9 books in the Runelords series by David Farland, the Huge Guardian of Ga'Hoole by Catherine Lasky, or the 6 books in the Sevenwater series by Juliet Maillet? As I said, on the one hand, there are so much more interesting and beautiful books to read, but on the other hand, there is a limited amount of reading time each day. Trying to make the most of that is a daunting task, which at times can overwhelm me. And even though I sometimes pick up a book that doesn't live up to its expectations, without exception, it provides me with an experience that leaves me richer than I was before. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.